case examples. Just want to let you know, I'm a fire investigator, so my examples are going to be fire investigations. They're all relatively old, so we don't step on anything that's in litigation or could become litigated. But this applies a lot wider than just fire investigations. You can, all of you that have been adjusting for any time have all dealt with water losses, refrigeration and HVAC failures. And if you could maybe consider a shipment of COVID vaccines that had to be refrigerated, refrigeration unit fails, that would be a considerable subrogation issue. I'm reminded we had an expert that dealt with a refrigeration failure some years ago, and the unit contained a number of artificial hearts, and they were all ruined. So you can imagine how large the loss was. Excuse me just a second. Yeah, there we go. So I'll try to make these examples real to you as they were real to me. And once again, this is going to be from my point of view of what works and doesn't work. And in some of these examples, I'm not going to be the first party expert. I'm going to be the liability expert. There's two of them that have represented manufacturers. So you can see some issues coming from the other side if you're a liability adjuster and how important these are. So the point is, it takes good investigators and engineers to understand what is required for successful subrogation. Education training are good, but it takes a lot of experience dealing with various types of losses to figure out all the elements that are needed for a successful recovery action, because there's a lot of impediments here. In this, you know, if you get your investigators from Walmart, you're going to pay for that. You can, I'm not dissing Walmart. My sister-in-law is a store manager. So, but if you go the cheap route, you're going to pay for it. Now, I believe, Kelly, at this time, I think we're ready for polling question number 1. And while we're dealing with that, just a note that we're offering 1 hour of Wyoming continuing education credits. So make sure that you submit your license number. And the polls are coming in. This is an actual poll. This is not something else. But boy, it looks like we have a lot of people with 10 years plus experience. With 18 states, I mean, people reporting, we've got 83% have over 10 years of experience. Wow, I think I better be on my game here. So that's really great. So let me minimize that and I'll move along. So as an icebreaker, well, let's go here. There we go. This is an old fire. It's a large fire in Montana in Miles City, probably 2008. The point I'm going to make in these series of slides is you cannot determine potential recovery at first glance. Obviously, there's a lot of bad stuff happening here. Fires in buildings that are well over 100 years old, a lot of masonry collapse. The fire actually occurs in the occupancy that's on the right side of your screen. And while it looks hard, there was successful recovery in this case. When you see stuff like this going down the road, you're thinking, boy, I don't know, are we going to have too much destruction? By the way, that's a tree trunk that excavator's got a hold of, and he has to knock down some unstable buildings. And I thought that was an interesting shot. So the fire occurs in this occupancy right here. The fire department gets called for smoke on the first floor. They enter, they find there's a wall open due to renovation and there's smoke pouring out of it, and then fire. They're unable to get to the seat of the fire or get into the basement to find out where this might be coming. When they get pushed out, the fire extends through this whole construction and burns basically half a city block down. But here's the rest of the story. Well, on the initial exam, we were working, gathering data, meeting with the public officials, trying to find out what we could find out. When I was engaged with a Montana State fire marshal, and he pointed to a gentleman walking down the sidewalk. He says, I think it's in your best interest to go talk to him. So another investigator and I walked up, introduced ourselves, started to talk, asked if he knew anything about the fire. He said that he had been inside working on a remodel and that the building had old hot water cast iron pipes. And to remove them, they were cutting them up with a rotary saw with a metal cutting blade, producing a lot of sparks. He noticed a lot of the sparks were falling into an open wall cavity, and presently some smoke and then started coming out of that cavity, and they left and called the fire department. So we're able to kind of close that loop and narrow where the fire could have occurred. So when we did our initial exam, we noticed the pipe that red arrow is pointing at, cast iron pipe that had some cuts on it that were not consistent with something from the 1800s. So we worked around that. We're able to excavate that site with the use of that track hoe and some back labor and uncovered the base of that wall and that pipe. So that was a successful conclusion. That's about 4 days worth of work right there. So a little bit of persistence pays off in this. So let's talk about the essential basics here. And I no means I'm going to be able to completely talk about every point, but I'm going to identify the basic ones and we'll work off of that. Your expert needs to work the case hard. And there's a couple different aspects to working a loss, whether it be a water loss or HVAC issue or a fire loss. Is not only do you want to identify the causal factors, where it is, what happened, why did it happen, but who's damaged by this? So we need to identify the parties involved. And myself, when I start an investigation, I'm looking for the parties that are involved. And those are the parties that are damaged and the parties that may be involved with the cause. They all have an interest, usually an insurable interest. And it's just best for everybody that we identify everybody that's involved. Sometimes even with a cause, we might go a little bit far with that, but it's better to notify too many people than not enough. And then those parties, they can make their own decision whether they want to be involved or not. Along with that, we need to preserve and secure that lost site to avoid the loss of evidence. That could be by boarding up, it could be by fencing, it has to involve some locks and some combinations. And, generally in this region, we do a pretty good job of that. And the restoration company's working with you all, the adjusters. We do pretty good. And what we really need to do behind that is avoid the loss of evidence. Now, if I can just read this definition of this term that I come to want to avoid, it's called spoliation. And spoliation is the loss, destruction, or material alteration of an object or document that is evidence or potential evidence in a legal proceeding by one who has the responsibility for its preservation. So if we have the lost site, then we all together have a duty to preserve that evidence. And if we don't do that, if spoliation does occur, then we have problems with those interested parties above. Those that are damaged, they come to me and say, hey, where's my money? I've got recovery here. You messed that up. I want my money. So you can kind of see where that could go. Or the people involved with the cause say, hey, boy, that's great. No evidence, no claim, no nothing. I'm out of here. Let's do lunch. And they're real happy. A real prime example that's not on the screen, just popped into my mind, was a rather large loss in another state that had been in a building that had 3 occupancies, had been extensively renovated. And it was just one of those ones, there was a lot of contractors, subcontractors that had to be put on notice. And in excavating the area of origin, we found a gasoline can right in the middle there where it should not have been. And they all said, well, let me go call my client, and half the folks left because they were off the hook. And it ended up being an arson, but you can kind of get the gist of that is we have to preserve all of the information for all of these parties so everybody has an equal opportunity to interpret all of the data or information involved in this case. And that's pretty important. And then notification of all of these parties. They all have to be notified, typically with a letter or otherwise, that this car's loss occurred at this date, at this address, and we've been retained to represent this, and you've been identified as a potential party, and we're letting you know we're going to move forward on this, and you need to contact me at this number and this email address. So that's kind of what the notification is. Now, some folks want the expert to do the notifying. That's not a good idea. It's not a good idea for me to do the notifying, and I believe we may have an attorney or two in the room, well, in the Zoom room, as it were. You want to keep me, the expert, as a third party. You don't want me having any skin in this game. There should be no interest from me. Not that I don't care about you, the client, but if opposing counsel sniffs that I'm being an advocate for you, that's going to come out. They're going to come after me in a deposition and try to make me part of you. And we don't want to do that. We want to be a third party that it doesn't matter which way it goes. We're just giving you an opinion, and that's the way it is. And we're not going to benefit from this. So that's really kind of why we shy away from and suggest that you use an experienced attorney, either in-house counsel or a subrogation attorney. Obviously, if you're on the liability side on a notice, you're involved with a cause. You've got a third party claim, you want to go with that kind of person, or maybe you have in-house subrogation people that handle notifications, but you really want to keep your expert at arm's length as far as interest here. So let's see here. That's the essential basics. Kelly, I think we've time for question number 2. Here we go, question number 2. This is kind of a trick question. So, interesting. That's a split answer. I'll minimize that. Really, the responsibility really bears on all of us to make sure it's done. If an attorney sends out a notice letter, puts my name on it, and I know who the letter has gone to, there's a pretty good chance after a week or so, I'm going to be, kind of looking to see where they're at in this, because we do want everybody involved. So moving on, Mr. PowerPoint, let's go. What are we doing here? Why is there potential for subrogation? The first one is we're all people. We all make mistakes. That's always going to be the number one driver behind recovery, is somebody made a mistake and caused a loss. So the number one factor with people that I have found in years of doing this is failure to manufacture, install, or maintain according to instructions. That's number one. Someone didn't do what they were supposed to do. Someone designs a product, it has to be manufactured, it has to be installed, and then it has to be maintained. And that maintenance issue often is a real problem with people failing to maintain, and we're going to see some examples of that. They didn't read the manual, they chose to ignore it. Goes right along with that. I am trained to investigate solid fuel burning appliances, wood stoves, fireplaces, pellet stoves. I took a class with a very well-known instructor in the industry. The first slides of his PowerPoint had a picture of a manual, and I'm not joking. A manual. He said, you got to get the manual. He said, Everything that goes wrong is related to that. And he said, read especially the things printed in red in bold lettering or set within some outline. He says, because that's where the problems are. And it's amazing how many people just do not read the manual. They are naive or willingly ignorant of accepted practices. When you plumb a structure, wire a house, roof a building, there's accepted practices. And either they weren't trained or they're willingly ignorant and they think they're smarter than the people or the things that have been developed over time. Another one is just poor workmanship. People haven't been trained or they just don't have the capability of doing the job correctly. A good example of that is those of you who've done any wiring or seen wiring in a junction box, use a wire nut. That wire nut provides a minimum of 3 pounds of pressure or torque between those two conductors to avoid a loose connection. I still see black tape being used out there, and that's not going to do that. And sooner or later, there's going to be a problem there with that loose connection. Or they're unaware of code requirements. And just to let you know, fire code is written in blood. I mean, it's written because someone got burned or killed. And there's a reason those codes are written, and sometimes they're just not aware of those. So let's see. Let's start with commercial kitchen fires for an example. The reason I wanted to start with this is if there's always somebody at fault. Commercial kitchens are outfitted with a hood and duct system to safely contain the grease-laden vapors produced by cooking and to put out a fire that occurs in the cooking line. Now, if you're cooking with a wok or a lot of grease, sooner or later you're going to have a fire. And what should happen is that trips the system. The system dumps this wet molasses on it and puts it out. The restaurant operator cleans up the mess, calls his system contractor. He recharges the system, puts the links back in. They go back in business. No harm, no foul. The problem is when the fire gets away from that cooking line, burns part of the roof off, damages the kitchen, smokes up the dining room, and causes, a 300 plate a day restaurant to go out of business. Someone's always at fault. We're going to talk about this. There's 3 main parties, actually 4, but 3 that we usually find have an issue. The first one's the restaurant themselves. They fail to clean. They allow a big grease buildup, or they move appliances around the cooking line. So now the nozzles from your suppression system aren't bearing on the cooking surface. So that one's on the restaurant. The next one's the cleaning contractor for the hood and duct system. And they clean on a schedule prescribed by code, and they clean the hood and the duct of all the accumulated grease and nasty stuff. This is a nasty, nasty job. It's always done after hours. They have to put plastic down. So some systems are big enough they have to crawl in there, and they're wearing Tyvek. They use machines. And it's a nasty job. The next one is the maintenance contract for the hood and duct system. They need to test, maintain, replace parts, and do a report that this system's ready to go according to the manufacturer's specs. So, and that is done also according to code on a time basis. And sometimes people cut corners here. So, and then improper installation of the system. We see that a little bit less, but it still can happen. So here's a great example. This is a fire in a convenience store out on the plains where nobody does anything right. And I'm not joking there. All 3 of those players have fault in this. The left-hand arrow pointing up is pointing to a grease filter up in the hood. That's not set right. That filter should be oriented up and down so grease can stick to it, run down into the collection tray and into a container. So that's strike 1. Strike 2 is the nozzles within the red circle. They're positioned to put out maybe half the potential fire that might be causing. Usually you have a horizontal line with nozzle drops that would be over each one over those fryers on the left and the griddle on the right, at least 2 of them over the griddle. So that's not That's not going to fly. Obviously, it didn't work. And then the last one, that arrow pointing down behind that Dean fryer, is where the fire occurred. Is the operator of the restaurant didn't clean anything, and they created a gigantic grease pool fire behind that Dean fryer. So everything went wrong on this. There was no subrogation because everybody kind of really didn't do their job. Just basically a giant example of carelessness. Now, an issue with these restaurants is the insurance is going to scream at you that he needs to clean up the kitchen and get back in business. And you really can't blame them. I mean, they've been taught since they were knee-high to a grasshopper that you have to have a clean kitchen. The health department comes by and bugs them all the time to make sure everything's right. And they're there to cook. And now we're going to tell them, you got to stop for a while. So it's really important they don't clean that kitchen up for a number of reasons. One of the data points in this investigation for everybody is how clean is it behind that range? How clean is it around the fryers? And we really don't want to alter that. I suggest that you get an investigator there right away. And this was my fire, and I helped the restaurant owner take the things out that were going to rot out of nearby coolers, kind of the stuff that didn't matter, get them out of the way, and give them some other stuff to clean up to keep them busy. But that basically what you see had to stay the way it is. It's all important. And, you just have to kind of deal with it. This is a picture. Here's a good example. Sometimes people might not tell the truth. This is related to the previous slide. The maintenance contractor for the hood and duct for the fire suppression system had come in and wrote on his little sheet that everything worked and he didn't test nothing. He later confessed that he got too busy and was kind of skipping steps. Well, that's an agent line that we cut away, and it's plugged full of grease, and it was plugged full of grease for about 15 feet. So there's no way for the agent to flow to put the fire out. That's not really very good. Obviously, the system can't work. The second one is all of these systems have a mechanism to shut off the cooking line. This is a gas valve. If this was all electric, there would be a shut off to the a turn off for the electrical, so that when a fire causes it, it cuts off the heat, so your cooking line stops cooking. Well, this one, the range kept right on going, and the fire didn't die out like it was supposed to. Found out that not only was this clogged with grease, but the wire back to this went through a couple pulleys, and it was off the pulleys. The guy, he hadn't function tested this at all. This was obviously successful recovery, but rather sad that this was something that could have been avoided. A rather egregious example. So let's go to solid fuel burning appliances. Some of the stuff here that I talked about previously was people don't follow instructions in this. Now we're going to talk about some, this encompasses fireplaces, wood stoves, pellet stoves, and you can even include gas log fireplaces because they're installed kind of under the same kind of code and have some of the same venting issues. So our first example, now, if I was in a class, I would ask you, what's wrong with this picture? That's a pellet stove. And we're just right off the bat, there's an obvious issue. Now, I'm representing the manufacturer of this pellet stove. Within the circle is a manufacturer's plate. There it is. And on that plate, there's some pretty important bullet points. And one of them says, unit must be placed on a non-combustible floor. That looks like carpet to me. I don't see no non-combustible floor. And then it gives parameters how far it needs to extend out. So we got a problem right there. It's right on the carpet. Now, I did get the manual to this. Obviously, I'm representing the manufacturer, so that was easy for me to obtain. So now we're going to look at the venting. This is up in the mountings. That is 3-inch pipe. The altitude requires 4-inch. That weatherhead is supposed to be pointed towards the ground somehow they missed the elbow, and they've got it pointed right into the prevailing wind. They managed to put this on the side of the prevailing wind. I think it was northwest. So this poor old stove, he's got an air problem to start with, having a hard time getting rid of the stuff that's supposed to be going out. And now we're going to show that we got a problem with the stuff going in. Opening the door in the middle of that, where you see all that black stuff, that's the fire pot where the fire occurs. Obviously, it's jammed full of pellets and degraded pellets. Excavating that, we get this plate which sits in that pot, and this is where the air comes in. If you looked at the manual for this, you find this needs to be serviced every other day if you use this consistently for heat. On the left, you can see there's a lot of them holes ain't open, and on the right, you can see where those holes are. That's rather interesting. So I could put a whole bunch more slides up here about other things that went wrong, but this is one of them where they did almost nothing according to the manual. So they must have just got the parts, thrown it together, and they ended up with a fire in their business. And I can tell you, if you mess with the airflow and the pellet stuff, you may not burn your house down, but you will have a whale of a smoke loss. So Kelly, we got one last poll question. It's right here.
Yeah, I also want to let you know as well, we have a question in the chat from Rich Jortberg as we do this poll. If you want to take a look on your chat there, Rick.
Where do I see this?
Here, I'll read it off to you. Regarding fire losses, Rich has noticed a lot of fire protection companies often racing to the scene to take away the equipment that might have been defective, inoperable, probably to create a spoilage issue. Do you see this often? And do you have any comments regarding how to avoid this contamination? Insurance typically calls fire protection before insurance companies.
That's a great question, and you just have to do the best you can as far as getting there, securing the scene, telling the insured as soon as you talk to them, don't let anybody mess with it. That should be out of your mouth right away. If you can, don't let them take anything away. But if they do take it away, then I just need to be, the investigator needs to be directed to follow up on that and see what they took. The previous example with the bad restaurant, the guy came in while I was standing there. So I kind of told him, I said, you can look, but you can't touch. His jaw dropped and he walked right out the door. So Rich, that's a great question. Just do the best you can. If they do take it, we just need to find the documents as to what they took. And while you're at it, any of the paperwork regarding servicing, we need to start collecting that. So great. Well, 47% of you don't have subrogation support. Okay, let's move along here. But those of you who don't have subrogation support, maybe something we can talk at the end a little bit. There's some other participants here that may have some suggestions on how to deal with that. Maybe we can open that up. But let me move along here. Okay. There we go. This is an interesting slide that I developed for another class, just showing how complicated these can be. This is a fire in Burgosa Springs some years ago, and I had the building, and this took a lot of time. So what you're seeing is, and if I saw Kent Robinson's name in the room, I think this was his loss. So you have a business condo with 14 owners on fractional shares. There's 14 owners, they got 3 tenants. And then we got a fire in the restaurant. So you have the hood and duct, the Ansel system maintenance, and the hood and duct cleaning. So there's 20 interested parties in a whole bunch of different insurance companies. Plus you had the public investigation that dragged out. And what you don't see is all the fencing we had to do around this to secure this. There was a number of other complications in there. There was asbestos. This was a bad collapse, and there was the risk of some of it collapsing onto the street, and there was runoff, and there was all kinds of things. This just kind of shows all of the complications, and maybe you can consider this shameless marketing, but if you get somebody with no experience on this, they're really going to struggle. This is a bad place to learn. So you really need somebody that's been around for a while to deal with this. So moving along, roofing, welding, grinding, and other hot work. This is pretty good stuff. Just to let you know, you've got commercial roofing with heat, welding, grinding from welding or fabricating, pipe sweating. Might have been some of that in this last cold snap. This is an area that accepted practices in fire code really are involved in the subrogation effort. I don't mean to get into the attorney's part, but this is where that I assist with research on code. Just had a case I'm working on that will give that away in Denver. And Denver has a lot of amended fire code with added comments that are very helpful to understanding what's acceptable and what is not acceptable. Once again, a loss like this is figuring out who all the parties are. Obviously, we have a roof fire. This was obvious. It was caused by the people putting on a membrane roof. There wasn't anything else up there except for these RTUs, these rooftop units that we were easily able to eliminate. But what do we got here? You have to think about building owner, building tenant, general contractor, roofing subcontractor, and maybe the appliance caused an issue here. What I did was I researched the roofing and also the underlayment, what was underneath, determined how much energy it would take to catch them on fire, and then figured out what kind of heat output those air guns did. And it was pretty evident. If you left it on too long in one place, you could cause an ignition. This is an old case of somebody doing, I believe this is a tenant, we'll call it a tenant, out on the plains, and he's doing a little manufacturing on the side here. And he did his best to hide from me that he was doing manufacturing, but his coworker was telling me what they were putting together. And it was pretty obvious just by looking at things like, that's a lot of gas bottles, and that's a lot of steel, a lot of rolls for wire feed welding, a number of welding units that we're doing things. And as I excavated, I'm finding parts like, wow, this guy really likes to make a lot of these. This may be, just a side comment that this is a part that I'm really not involved with, is the insurance contract, what's covered and what's not. So this is another plug for an attorney. When you talk about subrogation, you really kind of need them. They operate in a different realm than I do. They think different, and they pick up things that maybe I miss as far as codes, accepted practices, how things should be. So appliance devices, machines, and toys. Here's where I got so many good things I could say about here, but they're too new. They're too interesting, and I just can't talk about it. But they all have kind of the same features or elements that you need to deal with. You have manufacturing, and you have use, and you have maintenance. And they apply to just about every one of them, whether you're dealing with a hoverboard or a forklift like this, or any kind of machine device, RC cars, your coffee pots. They're all they all have those same elements. So this is a pretty easy fire to deal with. They had a chase under the frame rail that had a bunch of hydraulic hoses that someone ran the main power cable along with those hydraulic hoses. Well, hydraulic hoses pulse and move, and it wore away the insulation from that power cable and created an arc, which caused the fire. But the big issue here, and just as important as the cause, is who's involved with this? Because we got a manufacturer, we have somebody that owns this, that rents this out, we have somebody operating it, and then who maintained this or who did work on this in the past. Did the manufacturer do this, or did someone replace something and just stick those things together? So that's just as much of a issue as the party. So you can see on the left, just as interest, that's the power cable, and the right's the hydraulic hose, and you can see that hole blown in the hydraulic hose where it Mr. Art got Mr. Hydraulic fuel under pressure out and moving. Caused a pretty good fire. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. We're going to talk a little bit about spoliation here and how important it is to preserve a scene. And once again, don't think I'm talking about a perfect world. I know there's no such thing. I had a fire in Colorado Springs that was it was a house. Half the house was collapsed. They put up a rather high chain link fence, and someone climbed over the fence, and the accessible part of the house was boarded up and locked. And the only way you could get there was to climb up the collapsed portion of the building, and someone did that and cut a bunch of the copper out. I mean, they must have really liked their meth to climb up the collapse, cut it out, throw it over the fence, and go over that chain link fence, which I don't know about you, but that's not real hard to climb over. And it wasn't a short one, it was a tall one. So this example here of spoliation, this is back in the medical marijuana days before pot was made legal. So we had, you had your medical marijuana plant here, and they had a fire, and one of the elements of their grow operation is grow light. And the grow light manufacturer hired me. This is an example of the light. That's it right there. This manufacturer hired me. So it was a rather humbling experience going into this. As a side note, the guy offered me a cookie, private investigator for another firm of cookie, and I managed not to cause him to be arrested. So I was a good boy. Anyway, went on to the fire scene. This is what happens when I show up. So the fire occurs on that thing that kind of looks like a bed, and there ain't nothing on it. Ain't no plywood, ain't no plants. I don't see no grow light overhead. I don't even see any wiring. So I said, yeah, well, we can reconstruct it. Okay, so where's the first fuel? We threw it out. Oh, that's great. So I kind of threw out the lights and the plants. So for me, I can make a surmising, but for my client, there was no ignition source, no fuel, no fire cause, no subrogation. So, I mean, this stuff does happen. We realize that we just have to do the best that we can do to kind of preserve these scenes here. So, whether you're working one side or the other, I mean, this is a pretty good day for my client. Now, they did maybe make a modification to something there after this fire to try and improve things, but I don't believe there was successful coverage. So, okay. And some days you should just stay in bed. Now, this is a fire scene. This is a long way. This is a 5-hour drive for me up in northern Wyoming. And this is what I see when I first pull up. It's kind of pole bar construction. I'm thinking, stuff's just laid on the ground. We can just pull the metal off and we can reconstruct this till I walk over and see this. So I do believe this is a chief officer from the fire department. Somehow he was having a bad day, and he must have had a brother that had a track hoe with a thumb. So they stuffed the whole building into this loading dock pit. And that's not just the siding, that's the roof. And there's a window frame in there, and all of the lights, and the service panel, and almost all the conduit. Some days there ain't nothing you can do. That's just kind of the way that it is. What can you say? So the moral of the story is you identify, preserve, and then notify. And just to summarize here, and I want to leave some time for some questions, is we'll work with you to identify all the parties that are involved with the cause and all the parties that are damaged. So we want to get them together, and then we want to preserve the scene. And just personally, I'm the wrong guy to do that. That's not time well spent. We need to engage somebody to do that. They're good at it. These restoration companies are really good, and I'm going to take a little side note on this preserve thing. I was going to do it earlier, but I had a very large loss in the south end of the metro area, and there was evidence that needed to be preserved for two interested parties. Where it occurred was separated from the rest of the house, so a restoration company could get in there and remove some textiles. Well, someone kind of forgot his company's rules. There's a good outcome to this, by the way. Forgot his company's rules, went out there and looking for a tool and messed up my area of origin. The bad thing was the guy that was the attorney that was running this came by, saw what happened. I had to drive down and pull all the evidence out there. But to this company's credit, a manager met me out there when I was pulling the evidence with the employee, told me where they went wrong and how they were going to correct it. And his response to that was so good that when I was involved with a large fire loss, guess which company I recommended they hire? It's his company. So making mistakes right sometimes is great benefit. But anyway, then we need to notify everybody, which needs to be done carefully. And let me just say this too about that notification here. You know, it's not a perfect world. Sometimes we miss parties. Sometimes we'll get everybody that's damaged, and we'll get everybody that we think is involved with the cause, and we'll get a joint exam in there, and we'll dig away, and we'll get to the bottom and get it all dug out, and we find something else. We have no choice but to back off and put them on notice. I know that causes a lot of heartburn with folks, but really scientifically and legally, we really don't have a choice there, that we've got to get those people on notice and do that. So identify, protect, notify, and preserve. So right now, that's just about all I have, but I do want to leave some time for any questions or comments. Kelly?
Sure. And good job. I didn't sleep a wink. That was some interesting stuff. I thought that was great. I'm not sure if anyone has anything like to unmute themselves to ask questions or add some insight. Kent he was on the line when you were doing that case study of his job. So yeah, sure you appreciated seeing that again.
Rich, I got a question for you. This is John Gartling.
Yes, sir.
When you know that, or you reasonably believe that a crime has been committed, what's your duty to report it to the authorities?
Oh, John, that's a great question. Was that, I'm going to guess that was prompted by the gas can deal. You know, especially if it's an egregious crime, we usually stop right there and we contact the agency having jurisdiction, bring them in, because they just became an interested party. So that one that I was talking about, that was a quick phone call, because everybody backed up and went, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, the fire that I was talking about was really pretty bad. And where we found it, the presence of the gas can definitely indicated intent to burn. So we involve them right away. We back off and stop and see what they need to do. Now, what we can do often, and it's not that common, is let them come back in. We'll observe them if they'll let us. And when they're done collecting their evidence and taking it away, the evidence they need for their criminal investigation, then we'll continue on with the exam. Now, if I'm dealing with, especially with something in a residence, and we find something like that, I will collect every possible ignition source in that area of origin. because we need to eliminate all the accidental causes, even if it is criminal. That's part of it. So that's kind of the action I would take.
One other question, if I could.
Yes, sir.
When you have a situation, we deal with a lot of losses up in the mountains, and when you have a scene that's very hard to access, and there's a building that's flat on the ground, and you're waiting for the other parties to make themselves available to get to the lost site. Have you ever run into a situation where you don't want to lose the scene because of avalanche or whatever? Have you run into a situation where you give them a deadline, an ultimatum, either you get out here by this date and you do your thing, or we're moving forward?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, a good portion of my clients are attorneys that I'm hired directly. With those notice letters, John, they'll always give them a deadline to respond now. So it's not open-ended anymore.
Okay.
Anyone else in the room? Now is your chance. Well, what we can do too, Rick, is make sure I'll have your contact information available. So that way, of course, anyone with questions. Oh, perfect. Right there, even better.
I kind of forgot that slide there.
That's a good one to have. Perfect timing.
Yeah, if you have any questions about my hairdo, call me. It's pretty tough to get it quite this way, but I'll let you know.
But no, this has been great. And we really appreciate your time. And thanks again for everyone being on the Zoom call today. April 8th is our next meeting date. We'll do this again. Bring your own lunch to the Zoom, and we'll talk about bad faith. And again, scholarships, get those kids some money for college. Let our golf tournament help fund that. Make sure they get their applications in by May 1st. And if we don't have anything additional, we'll let you all get over to the grocery store so you can stock up for the snowpocalypse coming. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, be careful out there.
Oh boy, we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Rick. Great
Thanks, Rick.
presentation. Love